I never expected to find out like this. A Tuesday night, just past midnight. I was sitting in my car outside the police station waiting for Sarah. She'd been pulling extra night shifts, and I wanted to surprise her. Maybe grab some late night food, bring back some normalcy to our marriage. Instead, I saw him first. Officer Jake Nolan. Tall, built like a brick wall, confident in the way cops are when they know no one can touch them. He strolled out of the station, buttoning up his uniform. A minute later, Sarah followed, hair slightly messy, her duty belt not fully secured. They exchanged a look, a smirk from him, a small private smile from her. She didn't see me. She got in her car and drove off like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just stepped out of a building where she'd clearly been with another man. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, pulse hammering in my ears. If I confronted her now, she'd lie. She'd twist it. I knew my wife. Sarah wasn't the kind of person you could just accuse without proof. She was a cop, trained to control a situation, to turn the tables. If she knew that I knew, if she even suspected, I had no doubt she'd find a way to ruin me. I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof. So I waited, I watched, and I started planning. We sat in a bar 2 nights later. Sarah was tense. Not in a way most people would notice, but I did. The way she kept glancing at the door, checking her phone, the slight stiffness in her shoulders. Something was off. "You've been working a lot lately," I said, swirling the whiskey in my glass. She barely looked up. "Yeah, they're short-staffed." "Uh-huh." I took a sip. "Funny, I thought Jake was off last night, but I saw his car at the station when I picked you up." A flicker of something crossed her face, too fast to read. Then she smiled. "Easy. Practiced." "Yeah, he stayed late to finish reports." "Lucky you. You always get partnered with the hardest workers." She laughed, but it was thin. "Yeah, real lucky." I leaned back, watching her. "You're sleeping with someone else, and you think you have this all under control." Then the fight broke out. A guy at the end of the bar started yelling, drunk, pissed, waving a beer bottle at someone. It escalated fast. He pulled a knife, and before I could react, Sarah was already out of her seat, moving. Fast. Too fast. She grabbed the guy's wrist, twisted, and the knife clattered to the ground. A second later, she had him on his knees. Arm wrenched behind his back, her knee pressing into his spine. But she didn't stop there. The snap of his wrist breaking made the whole bar go silent. A sharp cry of pain. The man collapsed forward, cradling his arm. Sarah stood over him, breathing hard, eyes sharp, focused. For a second, she looked exhilarated. The bartender muttered something about calling the cops, but when he saw Sarah's uniform peeking out from under her jacket, he hesitated. Officer, you good?" She rolled her shoulders, nodding. "Yeah, he's not a threat anymore." No one clapped, no one cheered. They were too busy staring at the guy groaning on the floor, his wrist twisted at an unnatural angle. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The way she stood. The way her fingers twitched like she wasn't done. She liked it. She liked the power. You don't just cheat, I realized. You control. You dominate. And if you find out I know the truth, you won't let me just leave. That was the moment I understood. Divorcing Sarah wouldn't just be painful. It would be dangerous. I started small, checking her phone whenever she left it unattended, watching the way she texted, the way she suddenly started putting it on silent. The hotel receipts in our joint bank account, always small charges, always late at night. The pieces were coming together. Then I found something worse. Sarah had left her police tablet on the counter one morning. I was just going to skim it, see if she had anything open about Jake, maybe a message exchange. But then I saw my own name, a file, sealed, marked for internal review. I clicked it open, my heart hammering. Subject Alex Lynch. Possible criminal associations. Recommendation, surveillance, potential detainment. My stomach dropped. I'd never done anything illegal in my life. But there it was. My wife, my own wife, had flagged me in a police database. Barely heard her footsteps until she was behind me. "You looking for something?" Her voice was calm. Too calm. I turned, tablet still in hand. "What the hell is this, Sarah?" She glanced at the screen. A beat of silence. Then she took the tablet from me and shut it, just like that. "If you didn't go snooping where you don't belong," she said evenly, "you wouldn't have to ask that question." My throat went dry. She didn't explain. She didn't even try to reassure me. She just turned and walked away. Like it didn't even matter. Like I wasn't a threat to her. Not yet, anyway. That night, I didn't sleep. She was planning something. Maybe it was insurance. Maybe it was a way to control me if things went south. But I knew one thing for sure. If I confronted her without enough proof, if I pushed too hard too fast, she wouldn't just lie her way out of it. She'd bury me. So I kept my mouth shut. I kept watching, and I started preparing for war. There was no going back. Not after that file. Not after seeing my own name marked for surveillance. I couldn't sleep. Could barely think straight. I lay next to Sarah, listening to her breathing, deep, steady, like she didn't have a care in the world. Like she hadn't just implied that I was a loose end she might need to take care of. She knows something's off. She knows I've been watching. But she didn't see me as a real threat. Not yet. That was my advantage. I needed proof. Ironclad. Enough to destroy her if she came after me. So I got to work. Step 1, the camera in her car, Sarah's patrol car, was parked in the driveway. I knew she kept it locked, but I also knew where she hid, the spare key. At 3 a.m., I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her. The floor was cold beneath my feet as I crept to the front door, listening for any movement upstairs. Nothing. I eased the door open and moved quickly. The lock clicked and I slid inside, the scent of her perfume still lingering in the confined space. The darkness made everything feel tighter, more suffocating. I pulled out the small wireless camera I'd bought earlier that day. It was no bigger than a matchbox, easy to hide. I pressed it into place beneath the dashboard, where it had a clear view of the seats. By morning, I'd know where she was really going at night. I checked our joint bank statements every morning now. The charges were small, too small for a normal hotel stay. No overnight fees, just a few hours at a time. Enough for a quick, secret meeting. I cross-referenced the addresses. Every single one was near the precinct, near Jake. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. My hands tightened into fists. I could already see the puzzle forming. Now, I just needed the final piece. It happened by accident. 2 days after planting the camera, I was in the kitchen when Sarah's police tablet buzzed on the counter. She was in the shower and I knew I had maybe 5 minutes. Before she came back down, I reached for it. Most of it was locked, secured behind department credentials I couldn't crack. But one notification caught my eye. A name. My name. I tapped it open. It was the same file I'd seen before, but this time there was an update. Reassessment recommended. Subject has shown increased activity that may require intervention. I stared at the screen. Intervention. They weren't just watching me. They were preparing for something. A cold chill ran down my spine. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. I shut the tablet and stepped away, my heart slamming against my ribs. Sarah walked in, hair still damp, eyes flicking to the tablet like she already knew. I kept my face neutral. "Coffee?" I asked. A pause. Then she smiled. "Sure." But I saw the shift in her eyes. She knew, and now she was watching me. That night, I waited until she was in bed before slipping into her office. She had a personal laptop, one she never let me touch. I knew the password. I sat down, my fingers hovering over the keys. I needed something, anything that would explain why she was building a case against me. Then I found it. A folder. Alex Lynch Confidential. My throat went dry. I clicked. Inside were notes, surveillance logs, screenshots of my search history, my texts, even my location data. She's been tracking me. I swallowed hard, my vision blurred with rage. This wasn't just a backup plan. This was a setup. She wasn't waiting to see what I did next. She was making sure that when the time came, I wouldn't be able to fight back. I closed the laptop and leaned back. Staring at the ceiling, she's always 2 steps ahead. I was running out of time. The camera worked better than I could have hoped. The footage from Sarah's car uploaded straight to my phone, and there it was. Her, Jake, talking, laughing, kissing. Part of me had held on to hope, some stupid, desperate hope that maybe I was wrong, that maybe this was all paranoia, stress, something fixable. But there it was, undeniable, cold, real. I rewound it, played it again and again. I forced myself to watch, because the second I looked away, I would start feeling, and I couldn't afford. That, not now. The night I finally confronted her, I wasn't even trying to. It was late. I was in the kitchen, whiskey in hand, watching the city lights flicker through the window. Sarah walked in. She was in her uniform, gun on her hip, expression unreadable. "You haven't been sleeping?" she said. I took a slow sip. Busy days. A pause. Then, she leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "You've been acting weird." I let out a dry laugh. "Funny. I was about to say the same thing about you." Her eyes darkened. "Alex, don't." I set my glass down and met her gaze head-on. "Let's not play this game." Silence. Then, the smallest tilt of her head. Almost. Like interest. "You think you know something?" she said. I exhaled slowly, feeling my pulse in my throat. "I know everything." I expected anger, denial, an explosion of emotion. But she just stared at me, a small, knowing smile curling at the edge of her lips, like she'd been waiting for this moment, like she was relieved. I was about to speak again, when she reached into her pocket and slid something onto the counter. A single silver key. I frowned. "What's this?" "A hotel room," she said softly. "The one you were going to follow me to tomorrow night." She stepped closer, so close I could feel her breath. "You're sloppy, Alex," she whispered. "And if you want to keep this little game going, you need to do much better." She turned, walking away, leaving me standing there, fists clenched at my sides. She didn't try to deny it. She didn't even try to lie. She just let me know, without a single threat, without a single outburst, that I was already losing. I looked down at the key, and I realized the truth. She knows I know, and she's still 3 steps ahead. I should have left that night. Packed a bag, walked out, disappeared before she could. Make her next move, but I didn't. Because I was still stupid enough to think I could win, I didn't touch the key she gave me. I didn't need it. Instead, I followed her. She left for her shift like usual. Uniform neat, hair tied back, gun holstered at her hip. The perfect officer. The perfect wife. I waited an hour, then drove to the motel where I knew she'd be. It was a rundown place, the kind you'd never look at twice. I parked a block away, killed the engine, and watched from the shadows. Her car was already there. 10 minutes later, Jake pulled up. I recorded everything, him walking into her room, the door shutting behind them, the curtains shifting slightly, movement inside. I had all the proof I needed, but I didn't leave. I waited. I wanted to see them together, wanted to see them in bed, wanted to hear whatever twisted things she whispered to him. That was my mistake, because I didn't see her watching me. I got home at 2 a.m. feeling sick to my stomach but ready. Tomorrow I'd file for divorce. Tomorrow I'd take the footage to a lawyer. Tomorrow I'd finally be free. But Sarah had other plans. The knock came at 3:14 a.m. 3 sharp taps, official. I was still half asleep when I opened the door, then suddenly wide awake when I saw her standing there, in full uniform, gun at her hip, badge gleaming. Under the porch light. "Alex," she said softly, "we need to talk." Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. I went to shut the door. Her hand shot out, slamming it open. Then she was inside. Then my wrist was twisted behind my back. Then I was face first against the wall, my cheeks scraping against the drywall. Cold steel clicked around. My wrists. Handcuffs. I froze. I could barely breathe. Her voice was soft in my ear. almost amused. "You've been following me, haven't you?" I swallowed hard. "Sarah." "Shh." Her fingers tightened on my arm. "You know, Alex, I really hoped you wouldn't push me this far." My pulse thundered in my ears. "What are you doing?" I gritted out. She ignored me, pulling me back and forcing me down onto my knees. "You're spying on an officer," she said, tilting her head like she was thinking it over. "Could be considered harassment." "You're insane," I spat. She crouched in front of me, eyes sharp and calculating. "I told you," she murmured. "You don't understand who controls this marriage." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth would break. Then, just as suddenly as it happened, she stood, reached down, and unlocked the cuffs. I sucked in a sharp breath, wrists throbbing as the metal fell away. Sarah straightened, smoothing out, her uniform like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just pinned me down in my own damn house, like she hadn't just won. She leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear. "You want to leave me?" she whispered. "Fine, but don't ever think about going after me, because if you do..." Her fingers brushed the badge on her chest. "You know who they'll believe." And then she was gone, leaving me on the floor, breathless, humiliated, defeated. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, staring at my wrists, feeling the ghost of the cuffs. She had made her move, and now I had two choices: walk away, forget the proof. Let her win, burn everything down with her. I reached for my phone, opened my messages, and sent a text. The next day, I met him. Officer Derek Marsh. I didn't know him well, but I knew he and Jake hated each other. Some precinct drama, something. About promotions and a case gone wrong. I didn't care about the details. I just knew he'd love to see Jake fall. We met in a diner. I slid my phone across the table, showing him the video of Sarah and Jake at the motel. His expression didn't change. Then, after a long pause, he chuckled. "Damn," he muttered, shaking his head. "She really is something, huh?" I clenched my fists. "I need help." He exhaled, tapping a finger against his coffee mug. "You know this isn't just about cheating, right?" he said. "If she put you on a watch list, she's planning something bigger, something worse." I swallowed hard. "I know." Derek nodded slowly, then leaned forward. "I might have a way to take her down," he said. "But it's risky. I didn't even hesitate. I don't care." A pause, then the smallest smirk. "Good." Derek's idea was simple. Bait her. Make her think I was leaving quietly, that I was weak, that I'd given up, wait for her to slip. She was cocky, too confident. If she thought she had won, she'd get sloppy. Catch her in something she couldn't cover up. "She won't kill you," Derek said. "Not yet, but she'll do something, and when she does, we'll be ready." My hands tightened around my coffee mug. "I hope you're right." Derek's smirk widened. "I always am." Final move. I went home that night and did exactly what Sarah expected. I apologized. Told her I overreacted. Told her I'd been paranoid, stressed, that I just wanted to move on. She watched me carefully, searching my face, and then she smiled, like she'd already won. Like she believed every word. I kissed her goodnight. And as I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, I knew one thing for sure. The next time she tried to ruin me, it would be her last mistake. The waiting was the hardest part. Letting Sarah believe she had won, pretending to be the broken, defeated husband who had finally learned his place. But the truth was, I had never been more dangerous. And tonight, she would finally see that. It happened on a Tuesday. She was working a night shift, but I knew better. I tracked her, followed her, parked across the street from the motel she always used. I waited. Then, right on cue, Jake arrived. They met in the parking lot, Sarah laughing softly as he pulled her close. A hand on her waist, a kiss against her neck. My hands clenched into fists, but I didn't move. I just recorded everything. I was calm, cold, calculated, and this time, I wasn't alone. Derek was already inside, waiting. Sarah and Jake walked into the motel room. I gave them 5 minutes, then I knocked. Silence, then footsteps, then the door cracked open, and there she was, hair messy. Shirt slightly unbuttoned, her eyes widened just slightly before she masked it with something else. Something amused. "Alex," she murmured, "this is getting embarrassing for you." I didn't react. I just reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and hit play. The video was short, 30 seconds, but it was enough. Sarah, Jake, the motel. The proof. I watched her face as she realized what she was seeing. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't in control. "Get out," she said, voice tight. I smiled. "No." A flicker of something in her eyes, something sharp and dangerous. Then she stepped aside, letting me in. Jake was on the bed, half-dressed, looking at me like I was already dead. Sarah shut the door behind me, and suddenly I was in a room with 2 cops who had everything to lose. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Because I wasn't alone. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "We got it." Sarah's eyes flicked to the screen. She moved fast, lunging for my wrist, trying to rip the phone from my hands. But I was ready. I stepped back, shaking my head. "Too late," I said. "Derek has everything. The video, the audio, the calls you made about setting me up." Her face barely changed, but Jake paled. "You told me you handled it," he snapped. Sarah ignored him. "Alex," she said softly, stepping closer. "You don't want to do this." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "You put me on a watch list." "You followed me first," she countered. "You were cheating." "So?" She tilted her head. "Cheating isn't a crime." I exhaled slowly. "You're right," I admitted. "But framing your husband for a crime? That is?" Her jaw tightened. I saw it then, the moment she realized she had finally lost. The motel room door burst open. Derek walked in, 2 other officers behind him. Not her people, not her allies. Jake was the first to react, hands up, eyes darting around, like a cornered animal. "Don't be stupid," he muttered. "We can fix this." But Sarah didn't even look at him. Her eyes were on me, and for the first time, she looked tired, like she had spent so much time winning that she had forgotten what losing felt like. Then she exhaled, stepped forward, and unhooked her badge from her belt. Slowly, carefully. She placed it on the nightstand. Then she pulled out her gun. I tensed, but she didn't point it at me. She just stared at it for a long time. Then finally she set it down too. A slow, almost bitter smile curled at the edges of her lips. "You were my husband," she murmured. "Now you're my problem." I didn't say anything, because I didn't need to. Derek stepped forward, cuffs in hand. "Sarah Carter," he said. "You're under arrest." She didn't fight, didn't even speak. She just turned, placed her hands behind her back, and let them take her away. And just like that, it was over. I stood outside the motel, watching as the squad car disappeared into the night. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But I didn't feel happy, not even relieved, just empty. Because the truth was, I never wanted to destroy Sarah. I just wanted to be free. But with people like her, it was never that simple. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my saved files, the evidence that had brought her down. Then, without thinking, I deleted them. All of them. Derek would handle the rest. Sarah was done, and so was I. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, took one last look at the motel, and walked away. 2 weeks later, I got a letter. No return address, just my name. I hesitated, then opened it. A single piece of paper. 4 words. "You never really won." No signature, no explanation, just those words. I exhaled slowly. And for the first time, I smiled. Not because I was afraid, not because she was right, but because finally, I didn't care. The game was over and I was free.